Are you a brand new podcaster, hoping to share what you're passionate about to whoever's willing to listen, but you aren't sure where to start? Navigating the logistics of your podcast can be confusing, from tracking growth to getting your podcast on the biggest platforms like Apple and Spotify. That's why I use Captivate. Captivate is a podcast publishing site that's user-friendly and offers everything you need to fulfill your podcast's full potential. They'll help you publish your podcast to all of the most popular platforms, as well as help you track your growth through daily, weekly, 28, and 90-day download numbers, as well as the averages, so you can see where your podcast might be flourishing or floundering. What's more, they'll help you with promotion and advertising. They offer free courses on how to start and run the perfect podcast, and they even throw in a free website with your subscription, completely customizable to fit your podcast's personality. You can sign up now starting at $19 a month, and you'll even get a free 7-day trial so you can decide whether or not it's right for you. Sign up today at thezoologist.net/captivate, and what's more, you'll be supporting my show. Captivate truly is a podcaster's best friend. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Zoologist Podcast. I'm your host, Jake, and as always, I am super excited to learn more about some animals that inhabit our planet with you here today. Let's get ready to get wild. Today's episode is about the giant panda, one of the most recognizable animals on Earth. Everyone loves pandas. They're extremely popular wherever you go. They dominate pop culture on a global scale, and a panda exhibit in a zoo is a surefire way to increase attendance. Beyond that, they've also become a symbol of China as a nation, and they've come to represent the modern conservation movement. But things weren't always this way. As recently as 150 years ago, no one west of the Himalayas even knew that the panda existed. Here's how these adorable bamboo-munching bears won the hearts of everyone from Beijing to San Francisco. Let's dive in. Hello everyone, thank you so much for hopping on today. Wherever you're listening to this, wherever you are in the world, welcome, and hopefully things have been well for you recently, whoever you are. If not, I hope a little extra knowledge about animals is at least a temporary reprieve from whatever you're facing. Hard to believe we're closing in on the start of April now, which is so strange to me. It still feels like February. This year is just absolutely flying by. I feel like I'm going to blink and it'll be 2027. Anyway, as I mentioned before, today's episode is all about pandas. Those adorable, fluffy, black and white bears you've seen maybe at the National Zoo one time or in a cartoon of some kind. Yeah, that's right, I am jumping back on the cute train after momentarily ditching it last week to talk about emus. Don't get me wrong, I love emus. I think they're super cool, but cute is not the first word I'd use to describe them. I don't know, maybe it's a word you would use, but in any case, whether you think emus are cute or not, the panda is an animal that I think pretty much everyone can agree is extremely cute. And it's at least one reason why they're so beloved around the world. Just as an example of how crazy people go for pandas, apparently back in 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic, maybe you remember this, I didn't know about it, the panda at the Smithsonian National Zoo in Washington, D.C. gave birth, and the zoo offered a panda cam online that allowed people to watch the bears during quarantine. And I guess it was so popular that it crashed. The website crashed. That should just show you how popular pandas are nowadays. Beyond that, they've become important symbols for China and for the conservation movement in general. They've come to represent both of those things in a way for different reasons that we'll get into. But what's really interesting is that this actually hasn't always been the case. As I was sitting down to do the research for this episode, I was really surprised by some of the things that I learned. The giant panda was really obscure in the West until around the turn of the 20th century, which you would expect. It's an elusive animal native to a part of the world that was quite difficult to travel to up until around that same time period. What I wasn't expecting to learn was how the panda's place in modern Chinese culture didn't really cement itself until around that same time. It wasn't until the 20th century that it really came to signify China as a nation, and it became central to Chinese culture and identity, which I wasn't aware of. We'll dive into all of it today. It's a very cool story, how the panda became a staple of modern-day culture, not just in China, but around the world, and how it affects the world up to the present day. First things first, though, pandas, in addition to being really cute, are also very, very cool animals. They're one of 8 bear species. They first came on the scene about 7 or 8 million years ago. Fossil evidence indicates that their range used to be as widespread as Myanmar and Vietnam, so just all over Eastern Asia. Today, they're confined to 3 provinces in central China: Sichuan, Shanxi, and Gansu. They can be found in mountainous and highland habitats. They used to inhabit lowlands and swamps as well, but habitat loss from infrastructure and other human activities have pushed them back into the mountains exclusively. They stay within the confines of bamboo forests. In fact, they can't survive naturally outside of the bamboo forests because a panda's diet is made up almost entirely of bamboo. And when I say entirely of bamboo, I mean entirely of bamboo. Like 90 to 98% of their diet is just bamboo. In captivity, they're usually kept alive on cereal, milk, fruits, vegetables, as well as bamboo, but in general, bamboo is the healthiest option, the healthier diet for giant pandas. It's what they've adapted to for the most part. The problem with bamboo, however, is that it's not very nutritious. And it doesn't help that pandas have this weird evolutionary quirk. So for the most part, they've adapted to feed on bamboo. They have adaptations in the teeth, they have adaptations in their jaws, and they have adaptations in their forepaws to consume bamboo. But their ancestors were carnivores, and despite those adaptations, they haven't evolved out of their carnivorous digestive tract. They still have a carnivore's digestive tract, and so they can't digest cellulose, which is a key ingredient in bamboo. So what pandas do to overcome this is they just eat massive amounts of bamboo every day. They'll spend 16 hours a day just eating. They'll also pass a lot of waste through their system. They eliminate their waste up to 50 times a day. Apparently, I didn't know this, but apparently they still have a taste for meat as well, and they'll eat meat if they can get to it. But they usually can't get to it. They don't have the ability to catch prey anymore, at least not like they used to. Now, if you've seen a panda eat bamboo, you'll know it's one of the reasons that they're so adorable. They've evolved this enlarged wrist bone with a pad of skin over it that acts almost like a thumb. I was at a zoo recently, and I was watching this panda eat bamboo, and I was watching as it was sitting upright, and it had a stick of bamboo in both paws, and it was eating at one. It would strip the bark off of it and kind of throw it to the side with its mouth, and then just eat whatever was left. And on one side of it was a pile of bamboo shoots ready to be eaten, and on the other side was where all the bark it had stripped off had been put. One of the coolest things I've ever seen, just getting to sit and watch this animal eat its food. It's almost human-like. It's very human-like, actually, the way that it sat there and ate. And so the way that pandas eat is just very, very, very cool. They're typically solitary creatures. So pandas, they spend most of their lives by themselves. Their ranges often intersect, however, with other pandas. So in order to communicate with other pandas, what they'll do is they have scent glands on their rumps, and they'll rub these scent glands on objects around them, such as trees, tall grass, rocks, etc. Sometimes what they'll do actually is they'll shimmy up backwards up a tree or a rock in order to get their scent up higher, and they'll do a kind of handstand while they're rubbing their scent glands against an object. From this scent, other pandas can receive messages and information about other pandas in the area. It'll tell them another panda's identity, its sex, and possibly even its social status. Males, they usually use the scent to communicate where they live, what their range is, while the females will use it to signal when they're ready to breed. Pandas are usually ready to mate in the spring, and the females will give birth in the fall. Mating and child rearing, in fact, are the only times that females will interact with other pandas during their adult lives. The gestation period for pandas is about 135 days on average, so anywhere between 90 to 180 days is usually when the baby is born. When they're born, they're very small. In fact, pandas, they have the smallest newborns of any placental mammal, so any mammal that's not a monotreme or a marsupial. They have the smallest newborns relative to the mother's body size. They weigh about 3 to 5 ounces at birth. For the first few weeks and months of their lives, the babies are completely helpless. They're blind, they can't walk, and they have to rely on their mother for just about everything. For the first few weeks of their lives, the mothers will actually cradle or cuddle the baby against them in almost a human-like way. They use their forepaws and their wrist bone to kind of hold the baby against them. After about 45 days, their eyes will finally open. After about 80 days, the babies begin to walk. It'll live in a den with the mother for about the first 100 days of its life or so. And then after 14 months, it's eating bamboo. And then after about a year and a half, that's when weaning finally begins to take place. Pandas, they grow to be about the size of an American black bear. So adult panda is about 2 to 3 feet tall at the shoulder when they're on all fours. For those of you who use the metric system, that's about 60 to 90 centimeters. 4 to 6 feet long, about anywhere between 1.2 and 1.8 meters. And then they can weigh up to 250 pounds or 113 kilograms if it's a male. Females, they rarely reach 220 pounds or 104 kilograms. Pandas look cute, they act docile, but they're just as dangerous as any other bear. There are instances, in fact, on record of people being attacked by pandas in zoos. After these people, they tried to jump into their enclosures and get a better look at them. I guess at that point, you're just kind of asking for it. My recommendation is just go to the gift shop and get yourself a stuffed animal. People don't risk anything trying to jump into an animal's enclosure, especially wild animals. As most people know, and as I've already kind of alluded to, pandas are very rare. It's likely one of the reasons people love them so much, actually. There are about 1,900 left in the wild. All of those are in China, as I mentioned earlier. The good news is that the population is actually on the rise. So China has been partnering with conservation groups worldwide for decades. We'll talk about that a little bit later. They've been partnering with these conservation groups for a long time in order to protect this species, and as a result, they were taken off the endangered species list in 2016. They are now listed as vulnerable by the IUCN, which is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. That's the organization that puts together the endangered species list. The biggest threats to pandas now and in the past have been habitat loss, which we've discussed, and then poaching. Another panda fact worth mentioning, experts actually aren't entirely sure why they have their distinctive black and white color. There's been a lot of speculation, but nothing really solid has materialized. Some people say that it's for camouflage. The problem with that is that it doesn't actually make sense. Pandas don't have any natural predators in the wild, and they aren't hunting down any other animals, so there's no reason for them to have camouflage. It's also been proposed that it's used for communication or as a way for other pandas to identify each other from a distance, but again, nothing is for sure. There's not much evidence for any of that. Alrighty, well, I think that's a good place to leave off. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back and keep talking about pandas right after this. Don't go anywhere. Hello everyone, and welcome back as we continue our discussion about the giant panda. I've mentioned before that the panda didn't cement its place as a central key figure in Chinese culture and identity until the 20th century, but that doesn't mean it didn't already have a place within Chinese culture before that. In fact, the panda's place in Chinese culture dates back millennia. It was written about and depicted as an unbeatable animal in the Shangshu, a collection of ancient Chinese writings that goes back thousands of years. They are attributed to having the qualities of a warrior because they can easily climb trees, they can forage for food, and they can survive in freezing weather. In addition to this, they're seen as a symbol of peace and friendship because they're seen as having a kind nature. Their black and white coloring, meanwhile, is seen as a physical representation of yin and yang, the balance of energies in the universe. There's just a huge list of things that pandas are said to represent or symbolize within Chinese culture. Among these is knowledge and eternal youth, as well as fragility, extinction, family ruptures, breaking with the past, and lateral thinking. The gift of a panda, like a figurine or a necklace, is also said to bring good fortune to those who receive it. The thing is that pandas, while they have been part of and depicted within Chinese culture for thousands of years, they didn't really become the symbol of China that we know them as today until very, very recently. Historically, it seems animals such as, for example, the tiger and the cat have played larger roles within Chinese culture. Regardless of whether or not it was a central figure in Chinese culture, however, one way or another, it was still part of Chinese culture. This hasn't been the case for the rest of the world, as you would expect. The discovery of the panda was quite a recent thing in the Western world. Apparently, no one in the West had even seen evidence of the existence of giant pandas until 1869. There was a French missionary by the name of Armand David, and he was shown the pelt of a panda by a hunter. He had it sent back to France, and apparently He was super excited about it. He wrote to a mammologist back in France, a man by the name of Alphonse Edwards Milne. And he said, quote, "I have not seen this species in the museums of Europe, and it is easily the most pretty I have come across. Perhaps it will turn out to be new to science." Well, for the Western world, it did turn out to be new to science. But despite this discovery, there still wasn't a lot of contact between the Western world and the giant panda for the next several decades. The next European that saw a live panda was a man by the name of Walter Stotzner, and he saw it on an expedition in the 1910s, over 30 years after David had seen this pelt. Sightings and evidence of any kind, they continue to be sporadic, but by 1919, the American Museum of Natural History had managed to get a mounted specimen, and by then it was pretty well acknowledged that the bear was real. That's where the rush to hunt this thing down really came into play, kicked into high gear. Everyone wanted to be the one to capture a live giant panda. Even former U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt's sons got in on the fray. Kermit and Theodore Roosevelt Jr., they went on a massive hunting trip to China in the 1920s trying to bag one of these panda bears. They ended up becoming the first Westerners to shoot and kill a panda, which is not a great distinction looking back, not one that I would want on my resume. Apparently they got really famous from this. They actually came back and went on a tour around the United States, did extensive media interviews. They even wrote a book because there was such a high demand from the public. It's called Trailing the Giant Panda. In one interview they said after killing the bear, quote, "The hired locals with us refused to bring the animal into their village. It seems the giant panda is a sort of minor deity among them." If that sounds barbaric, it's because it is. They became famous from these exploits, but up to this point, no one had managed to capture a live panda and bring it back to the West, and very few people outside of East Asia had ever seen a live giant panda. This changed in 1936. A widowed socialite by the name of Ruth Harkness, following the death of her husband, wanted to fulfill his dream of capturing a live panda. So what she did was she traveled to China, and she went into the jungle. She captured a panda cub. She brought it back to the United States. Apparently it was that easy. It kind of makes you wonder why it took everyone else so long. Probably because they were too focused on shooting it. In any case, this panda cub, which was named Su Lin, was an immediate sensation in the United States. It was very, very popular. It was reported on in the media. I'm not a big fan of pulling animals out of their natural habitats, but I was amused by this New York Times headline from the time. They reported, quote, "Panda here enjoys its bottle," which, despite everything, that's pretty cute. Harkness ended up selling Su Lin to the Brookfield Zoo outside of Chicago. It was visited by huge crowds. She was a hit with the American public. At that point, I'd imagine it'd be like if a zoo put Bigfoot on display. This is an animal that very few people from that part of the world within Western culture had ever seen before. It was seen as exotic. It was seen as new. And really, it was, for most of these people, it was very new. Most people had not ever seen anything like the giant panda before. Naturally, other zoos, they saw that success, and then they quickly set out to capture their own pandas so they could attract the same crowds, boost their own business. And they were successful. 14 giant pandas were captured and taken back to the U.S. between 1936, when Harkness brought Su Lin to the U.S., and 1946. In 1946, China finally closed their doors to foreigners seeking to catch pandas. After 1946, there were no more pandas brought to the U.S. The ones that had been brought there, they died off, and a panda wasn't displayed in an American zoo again until 1972. In the meantime, during the 20th century, pandas grew to become a symbol of China as a nation. And this happened after the Chinese Civil War. It was chosen to be a national monument of sorts. The Chinese people, the Chinese government was looking for an animal that kind of represented China and its natural splendor, its wealth of animals and natural beauty that could be found within China. The panda was chosen because it's a rare animal that is uniquely Chinese. In the wild, it can only be found within China's borders, as we've already talked about. Starting in the 1950s and up to today even, China will gift and loan pandas to other countries as an act of diplomacy. They're not the first nation to do this. In fact, it's not the first time China's done it themselves, actually. Back in 685 AD, the Empress Wu Zetian gifted 2 pandas to Japan. China started this practice up again in 1957 when they presented 2 pandas as gifts to the Soviet Union. Today, they only give pandas on loan due to how rare the species is, which is not cheap. Loaning a panda can cost a zoo $1 million a year just in payments to the Chinese government. That doesn't account for exhibit upkeep or animal care. A lot of these zoos take this risk because pandas are such popular zoo exhibits. People still love to go see pandas. They still love to see them on display. In any case, only the most prestigious zoos are selected to host pandas anyway. What's really interesting, too, is that China will actually loan pandas out to other countries as kind of a diplomatic tool. In 2013, the Oxford University did a study that found that China will often loan pandas to other countries in conjunction with major trade deals. They're also more likely to loan pandas to countries with strong trade or economic ties with China. This has been called panda diplomacy, and I think it speaks volumes about just how popular these creatures are worldwide. Now, because of how important the panda has become to China as a country, they've made greater efforts, especially the past 50 to 70 years, to preserve and protect giant pandas. This started in the 1960s when they established 4 panda reserves, and laws were enacted that prohibited hunting several different animal species in China. Pandas were among them. They established additional panda reserves into the 1970s. In 1979, they actually partnered with the World Wildlife Fund to make a joint effort for the conservation of pandas. They continued to enact laws and make conservation efforts into the 80s and the 90s, and it continues up to the present day. And as I've already mentioned, these conservation efforts have been successful. The panda has become an example of a conservation success story, kind of like the American bison or the California condor, an animal that's kind of come back from the brink of extinction. And speaking of pandas and conservation, I also mentioned how they've become something of a representation of endangered animals around the world, a symbol of sorts for the modern conservation movement. This also goes back to the World Wildlife Fund, actually. When the organization was founded in Great Britain in 1961, there was a giant panda named Chi-Chi. I really hope I'm getting that right. There was a giant panda that was being exhibited at the London Zoo. They used this bear as inspiration for their logo, and because of this, pandas have become associated with conservation and preservation of wildlife and endangered species. It's part of the reason that pandas continue to be a worldwide symbol for conservation even to the present day. Well, that's all I've got for you guys today. It is fascinating learning about and hearing about the rise of pandas as an international phenomenon because it seems like it all happened so fast. What's really cool is that this craze, this love for pandas that everybody seems to have, it hasn't stopped, and it's actually brought a lot of attention to the plight of the species and endangered animals in general. Just remember, next time you see a panda, be it at the zoo or in the wild, if you see a panda in the wild, I am very jealous of you. But next time you see a panda, drink it in, enjoy the moment, and remember, you are in the presence of a celebrity. Thank you so much again for hopping on today and learning more about pandas. I had a ton of fun preparing for today's episode, learning more about these incredible creatures and their adorableness. As always, there's still so much to learn about today's topic about pandas and their cultural impact worldwide. So if you'd like to learn more about that, head over to my website and you'll find the research links in the show notes. That'll be www.thezoologist.net. Be sure to subscribe or follow the podcast on your streaming platform of choice so that you never miss a new episode. And be sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can receive updates, news, and participate in all things going on with the Zoologist Podcast. You'll be able to find the links to our Twitter and Facebook pages once again on the website. If you have any suggestions or questions, anything I can improve upon, go ahead and email me at the.zoologist.podcast@gmail.com. Thank you all so much, and have a wild day.